Hello, everyone. I'm Ari Lax, and this week I'm going to be recording with Brad Nelson's Blue-Green Infect deck in Modern that he lost playing for top 8 of Grand Prix Pittsburgh with. This is kind of a personal project here to basically, I think that something I've kind of pushed aside over the last few years because I had a few events where it was like clearly the right thing to be doing is I definitely have gotten into this trap of trying to find a deck that is better than everyone else's deck, which is obviously the right thing to do. But I've definitely like ignored the technical aspect of my play to some extent over the last few years. Um, with notable exceptions of the events that I've done the best at, where I've kind of really understood the in and out of my deck. Um, and I think that I want to play a lot of Infect coming up because I think that it's one of the more technically, I don't want to say more technically challenging decks in Modern, because uh, Amulet's very technically challenging, but it does so in kind of like a you are assembling your pieces kind of way. It's not like how do I line my spells up best against my opponent's cards. And I think that's like one of the things that Infect is the best at forcing you to learn, because if you don't do it, your deck's significantly worse. Um, and like I've played this deck in the past, and when I played it, it was definitely a jam my cards at you deck, and no one had like people didn't know about Infect at the time, and you just killed them because they didn't have the cards for you. But over time, and you see this with a lot of combo decks, you see this with Twin, you see this with Infect. Um, you've seen this to some extent with Storm, but not in Legacy, I'm thinking. But that's more of a the deck plays all the same cards, just the way the games play out are different because over time you have to figure out more and more complex levels and dances of threats and interactions. So there's a lot of cases where these combo decks they start off as the first Infect deck that I played at Pro Tour Seattle was 16 Infect creatures, 4 Noble Hierarchs, 16 lanes that aren't Nexus, and just pump spells, and like not even like complicated pump spells, just like this one pumps for 4, this one pumps for 4, this one pumps for 4, this one pumps for 2, and it costs 0 mana. So there's 4 of all of those, and there's 2 Giant Crows because that's the best rate I can get. Um, so a lot of not very subtle things, and then you start looking at this list now, and you've got a couple Serum Visions, a Twisted Image, a Dismember, some main deck Spell Skites, probes. Like you're actually playing around into your opponent's cards a lot more, and I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of have to work through every single game, and something where I can really start diving deep into lines and what's actually going on in games. Um, the one other thing I do want to comment on, so um, obviously because Become Immense is so powerful, you are going to be playing more probes than you normally would. I think normally probably 3 without Become Immense would be the number I'd be looking at. Um, this card's like really huge in this deck, but on the continuation of my previous discussion, that's another crutch I've kind of formed is I've played a lot of decks with Thoughtseize and Gitaxian Probe over the years. Um, and working with perfect information, and this is just a general discussion on Gitaxian Probe just being an insane magic card in any deck that wants to put things into its graveyard or whatever. Um, why it's just something that's sort of, especially since the introduction of more Delve cards and Cons and Fate Reforged, has really just kind of taken off. Um, Playing Magic where you don't know the cards in your opponent's hand is hard, and that's why one of the like big like high level things that's like what do good players do that like separates them is they think about what their opponent has done over the course of the game and how that signals their subsequent plays and what they can expect out of their opponent's hand given the texture of like if my Splinter Twin opponent kept a 7-card hand, doesn't Lightning Bolt my first creature, and doesn't play a cantrip, I have to be able to beat their turn 4 kill or whatever. Like these kinds of things, like knowing how the game is going to form up or whatever, just based on the actions that have been taken. And the reason Probe is so good in this deck is because so this deck definitely you need to position your stuff, but often it's hard because you play your creature, they play the removal spell if they have it. Um, there's not a lot of flex. Your creatures are all pretty equally brittle, fragile against removal. So Probe lets you kind of figure out how to like line things up in terms of like, oh, I have to beat 3 removal spells this game. I have 2 creatures, but I have a combat trick to like save one from this, so I need to like I need to like groundswell through their lightning bolt, so I need to have the fetch land up for that, and then I need to vines through their terminate or whatever. That kind of stuff is like really what Probe helps you line up, and this is definitely a deck where the card is actually used. Like Legacy, Sneak, and Show, you don't really have a lot of flex. You're going to be casting Show and Tell, and they're going to die, or they're not going to die, or whatever. But this deck, you have a lot of flex there. Especially because you have Spellskite, Blessing, Vines in your main deck again. Just like a lot of things that have this effect. And, sometimes it's good to know if they have a clock, and then you have to race them so you don't, if you start. There's a lot of fine lines as the format's gotten more aggressive with this deck where. Especially because your mana base is so heavy on fetches and duels, where you actually have to decide whether you are playing the turn 3.5 combo deck, or whether you need to like position your threats and kill them on like 5 or 6 because they've run out of removal. And Probe is like one of these things that really helps you know that. So thanks, Becomements, for giving me a reason to play 4 of that. I was thinking of other things. This list is a little light on Infectors. That's kind of what Serum Visions and Probe are trying to tie together. I mean, I don't know if I'd play significantly more than, my original list played 16, but that was just the, first draft, jam everything at 'em deck, and not necessarily what the optimal deck for a more defined format is. I don't think I'd really play more than 14 right now. I think that drawing too many Infectors is actually as bad as being short one. If you're short one, you can usually wait it out. But if you have too many, often like you're completely stuck out of ways. You can't race your opponent. You'll notice the pump spells are very heavy on things that deal a lot of pump damage for a single card. There's no mutagenic growth. Only 1 Rancor because of the evasion being powerful. A lot of +4s, +6s, just maxing on those cards so that you have the ability. And this may be something that Become Immense has kind of opened up a little. You have the ability to play interactive cards. You can go down a card to dismember and still be about as fast as you were before. You're playing for this kind of 2-attack kill a lot of the time, or like, there's a lot more assembly required than just pump spell, dead, like, the way the old deck played it. A lot more like, well, I'll attack with Glistener Elf this turn, I'm going to might it, and that's my first 5 damage, and I can like Pendle Haven and threaten the kill in this many turns, and then my ground spell becomes, a way to save my creature or whatever. A lot more of that going on in this list than previous lists. I will note the Dryad Arbor is kind of it's another one of these cards, like it really should be in this stack. So you notice I've got creatures, pump, and then interaction. It really should be in this stack. Honestly, aside from Liliana being a card, it's being a random chump blocker just to pull out is pretty important. It's just another way getting raced is a real thing now, and this is a way to prevent that. Sideboard, moving on off of Therian onto more immediately practical things. Twisted Image for Spellskite, Corruptor as another Nature's Claim effect against Affinity, also to kill Spellskite. I did a few warm-up matches with this deck, so I'm kind of midway through a league with it. But I was boarding this card in, like, against Merfolk. It's actually pretty awesome because you can kill Aether Vial, but it's also like a live card if they don't have like their Vial or their Spellskite. Rancor is another way to bash through creatures. You could be playing Distortion Strike or something to that effect, but Rancor is also just like a more powerful magic card to be playing. Since the banning of Birthing Pod, like one of the things that like really was a pain was like Wall of Roots. So with Wall of Roots being banned, not being banned, with Birthing Pod being banned, you don't see a lot of that card anymore. So the Trample is pretty good at getting through most Trump blockers, whereas Wall, you take like multiple attacks to get through with a Rancor, whereas you could actually just like Distortion Strike. Relics, there's a clash here, but this card is very powerful. Hate card, I always talk about this being like a great card whenever you get to play it in Modern just to value kill. Some decks just die to it, and if you just get to have it, it's pretty low cost. And because it's such low cost graveyard hate, you get to bring it in a lot of matchups like Tarmogoyf matchups or wherever, Snapcaster matchups, and the card does a lot of work there. Necropede, almost exclusively for mirror and other like small ball matchups where things are trading. So this is kind of like effectively a Shriek Maul in that matchup. Nature's Claims, you got to beat Affinity, you got to kill certain enchantments. It's like the 4-life doesn't matter at all basically. So it's just a Vindicate for the kind of permanents you need to kill to not be erased by certain decks. Another Spellskite for protection, hate in the mirror, hate against all the decks that Spellskite's good against. This card I'm not sold on, the Spell Pierce. It feels like kind of a hedge, and I've just always hated it as a card in the format. But I do like some Dispels. This is just a good card, good protection. You can't play Thoughtseize without adding a decent amount more pain to your mana base. And I think, again, a lot of the decks, when I played this deck, Tempo Twin wasn't really a thing yet. So you weren't ever like beat down out of by Snapcaster Mage or whatever out of the Twin decks. But now you are, so Thoughtseize loses a lot of ground there, whereas it was previously one of your best cards. So moving to things like Dispel and off of the black mana is pretty important. So I'm going to try to play this a little more slowly than usual and kind of talk through every possible thing that could be happening. And we'll see if I can think of some interesting lines at least. This deck takes a lot of work to play, and kind of just want to get in the habit of thinking about a lot of the things that it needs to think about in order to function.